Hi, welcome back, everyone. We are in part 2 of adult sibling relationships. And it's just so fun that I get to have on my sibs, Kendra Grabowski and Mitchell Thomas. And we're just having fun chatting about adult siblings. And we said this last time, but I'm going to say it again. We know that not everybody has the same level of opportunity with adult siblings, and we recognize that, and our hearts are with you, deeply with you, if this has been a pain area. I have very, very dear friends that this is one of their greatest sources of pain, and I don't know why God gave me the siblings that I did. We don't pick our families, but He did. He gave me incredible siblings. And my hope for this episode is that it would give you hope. This episode really is for people where there is potential for your relationships with your siblings to grow. And for those of you that are not in that situation, I am deeply sorry. And I know there are some where that it's not possible. This episode really is for those where it is possible, with some work, with some intention, with some showing up, with some extra amounts of love. It is possible to nurture and grow these relationships. So if you missed episode 1, we really went deeper into the why behind why is it important to nurture our adult sibling relationships. Well, this episode, we're going to get a little more granular, a little more practical about what happens when you have conflict. What do you do together as adults, and some of those more practical things. And then you can go and create it with your siblings in a way that makes the most sense to you and who you are. So let's jump in.
Yeah. Well, Mitchell, we talked last week about you being the youngest, but we didn't really talk about it. We just mentioned it. So let's start with you as we look at what your siblings have taught you. What have you learned from your older sisters over the years, or are continuing to learn from them now?
Well, there's a joke in our family because I live out of town. And so when I come to town, it's, my parents usually, it's a big occasion. So they call me Prince Henry occasionally. Yeah. Prince Henry's coming to town and the red carpet's being rolled out. So I get some special attention. So I'm happy about that. But no, so I'm the youngest. And so in so many aspects of my life, I've been just a couple of years behind Krista and Kendra in terms of getting married, having children, raising children, adult children. And so my wife, Sarah, and I feel like, we like and we respect and we trust Krista and Kendra, even when ultimately we might make different decisions about certain kinds of things or think differently about things. But they have been an incredible resource and model of how to do some of those big things, and a place where we can bring questions, and sometimes in crisis, like teen child crisis, and we can be vulnerable in a way of like, we really don't know what to do here, really struggling with this. And not that they've always been through the exact same thing, but there are people in my life that I feel like I'm really able to open up to and to share with, and that they can speak from their own experience, and they know me and they know Sarah and they know our family really well. And so I feel like that's just an incredible resource for doing life together. We talked last episode about kind of knowing each other from the beginning. And so I think, to have insight into how someone's wired and how their family works, and then be able to be a resource for them in some of these difficult and in really positive ways, looking at marriage, or one of the things that Krista and Kendra have done with their kids, like when they're graduating from high school, or how to be better in relationship with kids when they're at college. Be like, oh, that's an amazing idea. We're going to steal that and do it in our own way. And so that's been something, I've been really lucky to be the youngest and being able to kind of watch and see what's happening.
Yeah. Have they done anything in particular that has felt helpful that other people could glean from and say, this is a great way for us to be the older sibling? I think sometimes in families, people get stuck in roles that they've always been in, and maybe not everybody likes the role that they're in. And I'm not saying that that's you, Mitch.
Right.
But sometimes it is the youngest that, wait, I'm 40 now and nobody takes me seriously still. How have you grown into adult relationships despite maybe patterns that you've had?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, no surprise to anyone listening to the podcast, Krista asks really good questions. And I think that's actually a really important thing, to meet people where they are in every new season of our lives.
Mhm.
As adults, if we're maturing, as we're growing, as we're becoming present day versions of ourselves, and bringing that to our relationships, I think that's actually really crucial, so that every time we get together, we're not stuck in the same pattern that we were when we were, 12, 14, and 16 years old. And so I think having space, really connecting with important questions about our lives now, and I see them doing this with my children as well. They've done things like, when we had our first child, just showing up. I mean, they were invited, but showing up and cooking a bunch of meals and doing some things around the house. And it was our first child. And so we were overwhelmed. And that story that I hear us talking about, of just showing up for each other in small and big ways, and maybe having been through something before and knowing what could be really, really helpful and loving. And so I've just felt, in so many aspects of my life, really seen by them and really known by them and really supported by them. And I know that goes for myself and for my wife, Sarah, and our children as well.
Mm-hmm. Krista, what do you think as far as how relationships can evolve over time and not getting stuck in patterns that might not benefit everybody?
I think one of the most important things that my siblings have done very well is they have been open to who I've become over years. And hopefully I've been that to them as well, that we've changed together. And one of the things I've talked about on the podcast before, but to know people in the present tense is really important. Who they were yesterday is not necessarily who they are today, that we have to know them in the present tense, and to let people evolve, to give them the freedom to change. And that unity doesn't mean uniformity. I think a lot of people think to be unified with their siblings, they have to line up politically, faith-wise, in all the different areas of faith. And, they have to like to do the same things. And that's actually not true, that we can have unity without uniformity. And we can really just say, wow, look at who you are. Oh, how interesting. That's how you approach that. That's how you think about that. Oh, that's how you worship. It's maybe different than the way I worship. Maybe that's a more formal tradition and we're in a more informal tradition. And it's okay. People evolve into who they are becoming and enjoy them in that. And I truly can say I fully enjoy my siblings into who they've become. I enjoyed who they were, but I really enjoy who they've become. That feels important to me when we look at adult sibling relationships. Ken, what would you say about that?
Yeah, and I think some of that curiosity of getting to know your siblings in their present day, I mean, I can think of different things that, to ask questions, to be curious. And maybe I do even change my mind about how to do things, because you're putting yourself in proximity to people to, think differently. And I think that's part of growth. I really respect both of them. And so to sometimes be at their feet, learning and growing and changing, is really great, and I think both of my siblings, I feel a real belonging and acceptance. And I think that can feel rare, but yet we know from research that everyone wants belonging. And so I just feel really fortunate that I can metaphorically be at a table where I feel like I belong. And it does make me want to do that same thing for other people, to been lucky to be able to feel that and feel like we all have a place. It makes you want to do that for other people too, because it's really a special thing. And I think there's such a place of safety and healing that our world needs right now.
And I would think that for the listener who maybe is thinking, I don't have that with my siblings, I don't have that sense of belonging, but I want it. and I want to cultivate it, there are opportunities to be the leader in that in your relationships. And so we have lots of podcast episodes about that, but that can be transferred to this adult sibling relationship. But to not be discouraged if you feel like that's not your current, and also that small steps of growth and small steps of intimacy are a good thing. You might not go from 0 to 100 in the next month, but if you do over the next decade, little by little, that is the right direction. I think let's make our goal that we're moving in the right direction of more intimacy and more trust. And that might be at a different starting spot for everyone.
One of the things that we do that's a small thing is we have a thread on Voxer, which is, for those who don't know, it's kind of like almost like a walkie-talkie phone thread, and you can listen to it whenever, so you don't have to be simultaneous. And we have this thread that goes back years and years, and just we don't use it all the time, but I'll be on a walk and I'll just start talking and share about my life and ask questions about theirs. And and sometimes it's really newsy, and other times it's more focused on a particular thing. And we've shared, celebrations, and also when we're walking in seasons that are more difficult, and asking for prayer or input or, just connection. And that's, like you were mentioning, Alex, like a small way that we can cultivate intimacy and sharing about our lives when we don't all live in the same town, or we all have busy lives or whatever. And then what I like about Voxer is whenever you have the time to listen to it and respond, that you can. And it's always exciting when you see the Voxer notification. That means I get to listen to one of my sisters.
No, I think that's a really great practical tip, because it does span location. It's a free app, and you can have as many people or as few people as you want be part of the group. So it can be inclusive in that way too. And you might have some people who participate more than others. But again, if you're wanting to lead in that, if you're wanting to be the person that sets the tone, it's a good way. Okay, I want to move to conflict, because we've heard really great things about your relationships, the three of you. And the truth is, relationships that are intimate have conflict.
Yep.
And so let's talk about that. Kendra, how has conflict looked as you've been older? Not kids, like not sibling rivalry.
Not fighting over curling irons and ripping her sweatshirt.
You mean when Krista ripped my sweatshirt?
Yeah, not those fables of teenage years, because I'm hoping that that's a teenage story and not just last week, the ripping of the sweatshirt. Now, how do you do that now? Because we're just going to speak in the current. We're going to assume you still have conflict today. So how do you manage that now?
I think we're all pretty direct communicators, which is maybe not always the case in other families, but I feel like that is something that we have just said, hey, when you said that, like, this is how I felt. And, just having those conversations so that things don't build up. I think some of it takes some courage, I've actually said to my husband before, I'm like, I felt weird about that. I'm like, remind me that I'm 55 years old and I can, because sometimes you almost do revert back into those roles, or you don't want to rock the boat or those kind of things. But I think having that, what they say, 20 seconds of courage, to say something can really, just diffuse a situation, be able to talk through it. I think the other thing that I've really been trying to employ lately is just to assume the best in other people and a best of intentions, that even if I did feel that way in a certain situation, that I really love and, know that my siblings are for me. And so if I felt weird in a situation, I think that just helps to be like, okay, I'm sure they didn't mean it this way, or, that kind of thing, and just assuming the best in people. But yeah, I think just being more direct, with each other when something happens, and not letting things build and stew and kind of thing.
Yeah, Krista, what do you think in this world?
Well, there's no shortage of strong personalities in our family. And so for those of you listening that have strong personalities, we've got them. We've got strong personalities. And sometimes that means there's more fireworks. And that's the way it is. But I will say the thing that I'm proud of that we've done is we do tend to have it out a little bit when it's, and maybe it's not small, but I think we often try to when it's small before it gets big. So we don't let things build up for years, which I think can happen a lot. And then it blows because you've built it up over so many years. So I do think we tend to address things that need to be addressed. Now, granted, that doesn't mean we address everything because we don't, but if it's important, we address it. And it's hard. I mean, I remember Ken, like a couple of years ago, like we were crying in a kitchen and really having a hard conversation. It's not easy. It's hard. But then once we've had it, we've been honest. We know each other. Like Kendra said, we move forward knowing that, thinking the best about the other person, and then we move on.
Yeah.
That moving on piece, I think we are good forgivers in our family. That even if we've had something hard, that we practice that discipline of forgiveness and we move on. Truly, I can honestly say any conflict we've had, it's gone for me because we talked about it. And now I've completely moved on from it. It's no longer an issue because we had that hard conversation.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think, this is one of the areas where I think I am a little bit the youngest and the clown and can use humor and diffusing situations. And I also don't live in the same town. And so I think there are more daily interactions with my parents and Krista and Kendra and them with each other that I think can be a little bit more complicated. So I have a little bit of a honeymoon role where I do come in for short periods of time when we're all kind of set up for enjoying each other. That doesn't mean there aren't things that come up then too, of course. So I feel like sometimes I'm on the outside of some of those things, but when you think about, each of us with our spouses and parents and all the kids, I mean, there's so many relationships flying around, right? And competing priorities and needs and opinions. And so I do think operating from a position of mutual respect and care for each other and the dignity of the other person and love. I mean, those aren't easy things to develop, but once they're in place, which I think we do have, then that certainly makes those harder conversations easier. Like Kendra was saying, like, I know you're for me, right? I know that you care about this thing very deeply. And even though we feel differently, I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to pay attention to you and how you're feeling about this. And let's have a good conversation.
Mitch, I will say one of your superpowers is humor. So can you talk even a little bit about how because yes, you live out of town and that's a part of it, but a part of it is your humor. You diffuse hard situations often. I see you do it all the time when we're all together because we'll often have we had 22 people over Christmas together. You're going to have some things that come up, but I constantly see you diffusing potentially delicate situations.
Yeah, I don't know if I have some grand strategy. I think it's maybe my personality and avoidance technique. But I do think as people, right, not just our family, any people, we can get so hung up on a particular thing and we can kind of spiral into our own feelings, opinions, grievances, injustices, slights. And so yeah, I do think, I mean, I'm in the theater, as you said, and so we talk about like the serious play of the theater. And so how can we bring a little bit of an energy of play, of lightness of being, even into a particularly, combustible kind of moment, so that we detach slightly from whatever strong feelings we might be having and enjoy each other and that laugh together. And that might relieve a little bit of that pressure. And I think, the dark side of that might be sometimes just, being light with everything and never addressing the serious issues that need to be addressed. So finding that balance, of course, is important. But I think Yeah, a little bit of a sense of play in our relationships or in our family community can go a long way toward maybe, yeah, keeping the energy from sinking into this really kind of dark or combative space.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, Mitch, that the family system gets more complicated the more people that are involved. And now that our kids are getting older, it's not just 6 adults with you and your spouses. There's multiple adults with your kids and having adult-sized lives and opinions. Kendra, how do you all manage that dynamic as far as this is ours to talk about as the 3 of us, siblings, versus when we invite spouses into a conversation versus when we have a whole 22-person decision?
Yeah,
Do you
that's a good
have a
question,
matrix
Alex.
of some kind?
Wow. You know, we do think about that, but I don't know if we have the answer. I think it's good to be in the tension of it, though, for sure. I mean, I know we've even talked about, the 3 of us, that even with our kids, some of their stuff is their stories to share, and it isn't even ours to tell each other, to just respect that. And yeah, as our kids get older, I mean, I think you have to be a little more, I guess, careful with what's shared, what's not shared, holding things in confidence, and yet some things, we can talk about with our spouses and our kids. And so, yeah, I think we're in the tension of that. I don't know if there's a formula. I think you just have to almost take each situation and just think through it and pray for wisdom in that. But it does get more complicated, I think, as your kids get older, and even with our aging parents, just what do we talk to them about? What do we, as they're going forward? And yeah, I think it takes a lot of thought and care and thinking through that.
If you have anything to add, or how you make decisions, or maybe somebody's spouse is bugging everybody else, and like, do you pull that person aside and say, listen, I'm reading the room and you need to calm it down? Or I don't know. How do I manage in a complicated family system where it's not just me and my siblings in the room? I've got other people I'm feeling responsible for in this group dynamic.
Because it can be really complicated when it comes to, let's say, one of our kids is dysregulated. And so they're impacting the entire group because they're all caught up in something. Maybe it's one of our more emotional kids and they're, a little bit spinning. Or maybe someone in the family's been triggered by a conversation. And so they are feeling a lot of emotion around that conversation. Like, all of these things have happened. This is all real life stuff that we experience. And so I think sometimes, and I'll just speak for myself here, but sometimes I've entered into those conversations with the person directly. Sometimes I've entered into that conversation with my own child and realized that I need to be the one in that room of the 22 that kind of pulls them aside and takes them out of the group dynamic so that the group dynamic can regulate again. And then sometimes I think the 3 of us talk to each other about things, because this circle is the safest circle, because we have a love that goes so deep and we know each other from so far back from our birth that there's just a trust between us that you can't duplicate. That's part of why the sibling relationship is so core. And so sometimes we will, talk about things amongst the 3 of us that maybe isn't for the whole group. And maybe we can solve some problems between us. Like, I feel really safe going to my siblings with something. So not that I always have to, but I can. But like Kendra said, but then there's other things where, which gets into another topic of, what we share. Because sometimes our kids do think we're the big fat Greek wedding and, we know everything about everything, and they get mad about that. So when it comes to sharing information and how much we share with each other, we've had to become more discerning as our kids get older about how do we be real with each other and let each other in to those vulnerable places, and at the same time not overshare to the point where our kids feel like there was a betrayal in that. So I think that's a delicate balance that we have to try and find.
Yeah. Okay, I do want to talk about parents, because one of the things that I've observed, and in the family I've married into, this is true, that siblings come together when parents have new needs. And so in midlife, a lot of families right now, people our age, are taking on a group decision-making process or a group responsibility of caring for aging parents. So, Mitch, how have you seen that play out? And what are you three doing that you think is a good thing as far as how you're choosing to care for your parents as they age?
Right. Great, important question. I feel like we're just moving into this phase, both on my wife's parents and my parents. I feel like in some ways we've been really fortunate in that my parents have been really intentional and proactive about some decision making that they've made around their living situation and their lives to try to not have the adult children get hit all at once with some of those things. And I know that's sometimes unavoidable, right? Things happen. One thing I've really appreciated, as the son who's not living in the same town, is how Krista and Kendra are really wonderful about being in relationship with my parents and helping them, showing up, socializing, having conversations. And in some ways, I think I've really benefited from that because they sometimes carry the burden of some of those day-to-day kinds of moments. But I also think that, starting from an assumption of that we love each other and we love our parents and we want to support them as best we can, that's an important thing as we get into some of the more harder details that might start emerging over time. And so, similar to the adult sibling relationship or any relationship, just being present and paying attention. And that's something I know I'm really grateful for because I feel like Krista and Kendra are able to do that living in the same town as my parents. So,
I would say when my dad had a stroke several years back, and I remember sitting it was 2 a.m. or somewhere around there, and we were sitting and having to make a decision about what to do, what procedure, whether to do the high risk one or the more low risk one. And my mom was sitting there having to make that decision. And it was hard. That was a hard moment because it's not just about supporting our aging parents. It's also supporting the parent who is maybe dealing with crisis around your mom or dad, so maybe the other parent. But I think what feels important to me in that is that you circle the wagons and that you support each other and that you're there helping make those hard decisions together. And you're not going to make perfect decisions every time. Now, it turns out we made a good decision together. And my dad has had a really amazing recovery, not perfect recovery, but a really amazing recovery. And it turned out to be a good decision, but regardless, we made it together. Like regardless of the outcome, that was a really important moment. And I think as we look at caring for aging parents, there's so many complicated levels to it, but how are we communicating with each other? And how are we supporting each other and making these decisions? The people aren't the problem. The problem is the problem. And how do we come at that problem together?
Mm-hmm. And having different personalities, sometimes I think we can think of that as an obstruction to come into decision making. But, we're all different people and we think differently and feel differently and have different roles in the family. And so I think looking at that as a potential for strength and for different kinds of perspectives, that doesn't always manifest, right? But approaching it in that way that, oh yeah, we think differently about this. So let's have a conversation about that and learn from each other.
Or in that moment, Chris, to Mitch's point is personalities. I mean, I'm sure Krista, she's more the emotional one. She's probably was rubbing mom's back or something like in that moment. And, I remember asking mom in that moment, because I think I did go into my oldest child role almost. And I remember saying to her, Mom, is dad a risk taker or is he not a risk taker? Mm-hmm. And I remember asking her that in that moment. She's like, well, he's always been a risk taker. And I think it did give her clarity in that moment to make that decision. And not that it was me, but I think it was, using each other to ask good questions in those moments too, to make the most well-informed decision, I guess. We really didn't know what was best, but I do think that's a good point, that we can all kind of play a role in those moments and kind of lean into maybe our strengths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good example of that, and of the unique moment that many of our listeners are in right now in midlife with siblings, is that it is often around decisions that are new types of decisions that are hard.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you make those decisions together in a way that unifies a family instead of tears it apart? Because that is not the goal. That's not moving towards intimacy. Okay. Well, before we sign off, I wanted maybe for each of you to share something that you have done as a family, either a tradition or a ritual that you feel like has strengthened your family, either the three of you or your larger family unit. Mitch, let's start with you. What is one thing that the Thomas family has done well?
Well, a number of years ago, we took an adult family of origin trip to Carmel, California. And I had never heard of something like that. I think it might have been Krista's idea. Sounds like Krista's idea. And it was kind of strange, right? Like, not to go with my spouse, to leave my kid. My spouse was a little salty, like, wait, you're going to Carmel without me? The kids at home, and a chance to really be together with my parents and my sisters as adults in a place that, maybe I'd been to, but we'd certainly never been to together. And we were talking earlier about, getting to know one another. And that was a really wonderful opportunity to not have any other concerns, to have these great conversations, have fun together, and to kind of experience each other as adults in that original family unit. So it took some work to get that off the ground and plan and make it happen. But I would say that was a really special and unique experience that we were able to do.
Kendra, what stands out to you?
Well, when I was reflecting on just some memories of my siblings, when I turned 50 a few years ago, my friends were planning, a party, and then we did the little trolley thing that you bicycle around. And I remember sitting up there with all of my friends and just having a great time. But all of a sudden, my brother just popped up on the chair next to me, and he flew in for my 50th birthday. And I was so shocked. And I mean, it was just, I still love watching that video because I just was so delighted. You could feel I just felt so loved, and that he would come all the way from California for my birthday. It was just super, super special. Krista and I, we like to plan creative things together. We're kind of good at bouncing ideas off each other. And way back when, Krista had an idea to do hootenanny parties. And so she and I just kind of joined forces. And I don't know how many years we did the hootenanny, but and we've done lots of other parties since, but I just think that has been such a core memory for me, just of our relationship and just making people feel special together and having fun together. And so those are some just fun memories that I have.
Yeah. I mean, just even a few weeks ago, Kendra is like, for your birthday, let's do the charcuterie ski. And so literally, we went out to this lookout point and they set out a charcuterie ski, which was just the best. But I do think just having fun, doing things. We love doing Olympics, which anyone can plan an Olympics. Truly, you can do it in your backyard. You can do it on the cul-de-sac. We do it at the lake, and it's so fun. You give everybody headbands and war paint, and you got some good old competition with inner tube races and swimming contests and bubblegum blowing contests and hitting golf balls for distance. There was this one time I remember Mitch and one of my sons, Hudson, and it was after a bike ride or something, but they literally were so muddy, and then they rode their bikes down onto the dock and then off the dock, and they were launching themselves to see how far they could go. And I mean, those are the moments where you're just having so much fun together. And we love to ski. So a ski scavenger hunt has been a fun thing where we divide up all the family members. So cousins, aunts, like everyone's on a different team and you mix the generations. And then you have to go do things like you have to do a TikTok dance on skis. You have to like sing a song to somebody in the lift line. You have to go get a picture by this, one tree. And it ends up just being great memories. And one of the things that we talk about as a family is a little effort goes a long way. So if you just do a little bit of effort up front, it goes so far in the capital of building identity and belonging in your family.
Mm-hmm. So as we end, which I can't believe we don't have 500 episodes to talk about this, what would you say to the woman listening who would like to reconnect with siblings that maybe she hasn't talked to in a year or 2 years? I just had someone tell me, I see my siblings at Christmas. What would you say to that person?
Well, I've been listening to the Let Them Theory book by Mel Robbins over the past couple of weeks. And one of the things she says in there is be willing to go first, and I love that idea of just sometimes you have to just be the one to make the call, make the plan, put in the effort first, even if you feel like maybe you shouldn't have to, or, we cannot have all those excuses. But I just think that that's such a good mantra to going forward, is just being willing to be a little uncomfortable and go first and plan the coffee date with your sibling, or have just a phone call, or, whatever it is.
What about you, Mitch?
Well, similar. There's a theater director and practitioner and writer. His name is Peter Brook, and he said, you have to have a first rehearsal so you can have a second rehearsal. And he's just naming that, and he had this international company, people from all over the world. So there was different cultures, training methodologies, languages, all these kinds of things. And he would build these really beautiful, interesting multinational productions, really complicated. And I love that idea in that, we can't get to the second rehearsal unless we have that first one. And sometimes that first one might be hard, it might be awkward, might be difficult, or, certain things might kind of come up, but then we're on the road, we're on the journey toward creating community, building something. And so, just to have that first rehearsal, and likely the second one will be better, will be easier.
So good.
I love that, Mitch.
That's good.
And Alex, you talk about this a lot, but just get uncomfortable being uncomfortable. Be okay with the awkward. And maybe one of my encouragements would be go do something together. Maybe don't just sit around and talk, because maybe it's uncomfortable to talk right now. So is there an activity you can invite your sibling to do? Or can you show up and just say, hey, I want to come cook you a meal tonight? So then you're doing something, you have a purpose, and it doesn't feel so strained, that awkward space between you.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, wonderful words of wisdom. And we hope that this was a conversation that felt encouraging and gave you some practical next steps if you are wanting to move wherever your starting place is, but you're wanting to move towards intimacy with your adult siblings. Thank you, Mitch and Kendra.
Love you, Sibs.